Hi, and a good day I bid to you all. My name is Edmund Joseph, son of Alex Joseph, matrix number 273162, and I will be presenting a study in the internal factors and external factors that affect the profitability of the Home Depot. Moving on to the introduction, the Home Depot is America's biggest home improvement retailer. Home Depot is in the business of selling hardware, building materials, and supplies. The aim of this research is to study the factors that influence the profitability, liquidity risk, and also to identify the internal factors and external factors that play an important part in influencing the profitability. The problem statement. The problem statement is to ensure that the business is profitable. It is critical that the company manages its liquidity risk. Good management of liquidity risk will ensure the company is free from bankruptcy. In this study, the Home Depot's liquidity risk determinants will be discovered. The determinants of liquidity risk in the Home Depot must be calculated in this study because macro aspects could have a correlation to liquidity risk. Moving on to research objectives, there are 3 research objectives in this study. Number 1, to identify and determine the internal factors that may affect the profitability. Number 2, to identify and determine the external factors that may affect the profitability. And number 3, to identify and determine the internal and external factors that may influence the profitability. The research questions of this study are: what is the relationship between internal factors and the profitability of the company? What is the relationship between the external factors and the profitability of the company? And what is the relationship between the internal and external factors that influence the profitability of the company? Moving on, we have the literature review. Corporate governance. Corporate governance is a framework within which organizations prepare its various functions as well as guidelines of its employees. It is also a framework which monitors its core objectives as well as effectiveness of its organization. Corporate governance intends to create an ecosystem that is appealing with respective regional as well as international stockholders, as well as to increase these same societal advantages of capital expenditure. It also will help to boost regional public interest, lower a price of equity, as well as attract extra secure financial resources. Next, financial risk. Financial risk is the firm's inability to reimburse outstanding debts as well as meet numerous different monetary obligations. Next is the liquidity risk. Liquidity risk is the possible threat that an organization will not be able to formulate its necessary financial resources to fulfill brief or modest financial obligations. Moving on, we have credit risk. Credit risk is the probability that a loan will not be repaid according to the terms of the contract rather than the less well-defined idea of credit quality. So how do we handle credit risk? Credit risk must be handled holistically, including the acquisition of debt securities lending deals, and derivatives contracts. It is necessary for the firm to be able to protect its fiscal circumstances for sustainability. To make the right decision for the organization, the management should understand the correlations among the risk policy and the organization's unique credit risk policy variables, and the broader operation landscape when developing and adopting the credit risk strategy. Moving on, we have market risk. Market risk is the risk arisen from movements of interest rate, foreign exchange rates, and prices of instruments in the money and capital markets, which negatively affect the earning and capital of the financial institution. We have 3 types of market risk. They are interest rate risk, foreign exchange risk, and price risk. Moving on, we have the research methodology of the Home Depot. In this, we have the population and sampling technique. The Home Depot is the research unit in this study. Information in this report comes from the company's annual reports from 2015 to 2019. Knowing the correlation between liquidity risk and its determinants must be established. The study proposes that the dependent variable be liquidity risk, with the independent variables being internal factors, external factors, and both internal and external factors. Moving on, we have the statistical technique. Specific details in the income statement and balance sheet of these annual reports is used to calculate all facets of the business, including profitability, liquidity, operations, and many others, as well as to analyze the influence of these parameters on each organization and credit. Details about the audit committee, remuneration committee, board size, board meetings, experience, and overall compensation are used in measuring corporate governance index scores for non-financial results. Next, the ordinary least squares regression, also known as the OLS regression. It is a form of hybrid modeling approach that is used for the induction of particular response variables that have been collected. It is used to analyze single or multiple dependent variable as well as coding classification explanatory variables. It is one of the most common techniques for estimating regression because it is easier to implement than other technologies and produces results with favorable features. Moving on to data analysis, multiple regression analysis is used to determine the effect of independent variables on dependent variables. The effect of independent variables on the dependent variable can be explained using this form of regression technique. Next is the flowchart of research methodology of the study. We can see that in the independent variables, there are internal factors, external factors, and also internal and external factors. It is used to determine the dependent variable, which is the firm's liquidity risk. Moving on, we have the Statistical Package for Social Sciences, or SPSS. In order to obtain the results for this analysis, we used IBM SPSS version 25 to calculate the data. SPSS, or known as Social Sciences Statistical Package, is indeed a great software among those who are doing research, as it helps to carry out statistical data analysis. IBM SPSS statistics are able to carry out descriptive statistics, bivariate statistics, numerical result prediction, and recognition group prediction. We only used IBM SPSS statistics in this analysis to calculate the correlation regarding linear regression and variables based on the quantitative data. Quantitative data regarding numerical variables was collected from Home Depot's annual reports over the past 5 years. Moving on to findings and analysis of the Home Depot. The current ratio. The Home Depot's current ratio has been steadily decreasing from 2014 to 2018. Quick ratio. The Home Depot's quick ratio decreased from 2014 to 2017 from 0.3928 to 0.3662, suggesting that the ratio is not sufficient since it is less than 1, implying that the Home Depot will have difficulty covering its current liabilities with quick assets. Moving on to the average collection period, the Home Depot had an improvement in the average collection period from 6 to 8 days and was regarded as having low average collection periods. Moving on to debt to income, the Home Depot's debt to income ratio increased from 2014 to 2018, which is from 0.3552 to 0.4269. Moving on to operational ratio, the Home Depot's operational ratio has decreased over the last 5 years, with the most notable decline occurring in 2018, when it fell from 0.8837 to 0.8545, which is less than that of the operational ratio, which stood at 0.8675. Moving on to the operating margin, the Home Depot's operating margin increased as shown in figure above, from 0.1163 to 0.1455. Next, we go to the macroeconomic factors. The US GDP remained relatively constant over the 5 years in 2014 to 2018. The average beta, the 5-year company beta is positive. The return on assets for the Home Depot. In 2015, the highest ROA was 1.3290. The company's ROA, on the other hand, is at an all-time low of 0.1588 in 2015. Next, we go to the internal factors. The internal factors. Pearson correlation for Home Depot is 0.401, indicating a low positive relationship with CR. Home Depot has a quick ratio of less than 1, indicating that it will be unable to meet its current obligations. The average collection time was 0.496, indicating a low negative relationship. The debt-to-income ratio was 0.956, and that has a negative correlation with CR, implying that a higher debt-to-income ratio equals a lower liquidity risk. The operating ratio was 0.973, indicating a very strong positive correlation with CR. Operating margin was 0.973, indicating a strong negative association with CR. Next, we go to the external factors. The GDP revealed a negative relationship with CR in Table 2.2 for the external variables, with a value of 0.146. Inflation had a modest negative correlation with CR with a value of 0.630. The interest rate was 0.598, indicating a moderately negative relationship between CR and interest rate. The exchange rate is then shown to be 0.861, indicating a strong negative correlation with CR. Next, we move on to the model summary. 93% of the R-square has been changed. This means next, the discussion and conclusion. The discussion of results. The correlation figure illustrates that debt to income and operating margin have a strong adverse association through CR, in addition to being highly correlated with risk of liquidity. As debt to income as well as operating margin ratios rise, the CR falls. In this, the operational ratio also has a favorable connection with CR. Above that, the correlation table reveals that the average collection duration has a poor downhill association in conjunction to CR. It means that when ACP rises, the CR falls. The index for corporate governance stands at 0.00, meaning that there is little connection between Home Depot's risk for liquidity and corporate governance. Overall, we can deduce that both internal and external factors would have an effect on the firm's risk of liquidity. The limitations. This research just looks at the form of financial statements for 5 years, from 2014 to 2018. As a result, due to a lack of resources and time, only a small number of data is generally obtained or gathered. Recommendations. Effective management of a firm's operating risk is the best way to reduce the firm's liquidity risk. In this, when Home Depot's operational risk is handled with utmost care, perhaps by introducing a good framework for minimizing the risk of a security breach, investors can see better financial performance because the company is investing net earnings appropriately. Above that, it can also begin introducing its own staff members towards a value corporate strategy through which staff members evolve the cultural values in which people continuously challenge the established cost basis